All right, welcome to the Explainer. So, today we're diving into one of history's most towering figures. But we're not going to do it through some modern textbook. Nope. We're going to see him through the eyes of someone who actually knew him, who was there. I mean, think about it. How do we really get to know a figure from the past? We all know the name Charlemagne, right? But how much do we actually know about the man? It all comes down to the sources. And sometimes, if you're lucky, you find one source that changes everything. And this is that source. This is the promise made by a man named Einhard, a scholar right there in Charlemagne's court. He decided to write the life of his king so that it wouldn't get, as he put it, wrapped in the darkness of oblivion. And his account is what we're digging into today. So who was this guy Einhard with the ultimate front row seat to history? Well, he was incredibly humble about it, calling himself a barbarian, little versed in the Roman tongue. But in reality, he was a trusted member of Charlemagne's inner circle, a part of his palace school, and a close friend to the king and his kids. Okay, so before we can even begin to appreciate what Charlemagne pulled off, you've got to understand the world he was born into. And let me tell you, it was a mess. This was no golden age. Just think about it. The Roman Empire, gone. The massive continent-spanning trade routes, they had completely crumbled. Europe had basically fractured into this patchwork of warring tribes. Learning was rare, power was local, and life was, for most people, pretty dangerous. And in Charlemagne's homeland, the kingdom of the Franks, things were, well, they were just plain weird. You had these kings, the Merovingians, who were basically just figureheads. They had the title, the long hair, the fancy beard, but they traveled around in an ox cart like a farmer. The real power belonged to this official called the mayor of the palace. He ran the army, he controlled the money, he ran the whole show. So how did we get to Charlemagne? Well, it was a family affair, and a pretty ruthless one at that. His grandfather, Charles Martel, was the mayor who built this powerhouse army. Then his dad, Pepin, finally decided, you know what, I'm just going to take the crown. And he did. And then, in 771, after his brother Carloman died, young Charles was left as the one and only ruler of the Franks. All right, so Charles is now the one and only ruler. What's his first move? Well, it's war. Lots and lots of war. The first 30 years of his reign were basically one non-stop military campaign. Forging an empire, as we're about to see, is a bloody business. First up, he heads down to Aquitania to finish a war his dad had started. Job 1, secure the borders. Next, he gets a call from the Pope, who's having trouble in Italy. So Charlemagne sweeps down, completely crushes the Lombards, and just says, you know what, I'm your king now. And that was the end of the Lombard kingdom. Then he marches his army over the Pyrenees into Spain. Now this one didn't go perfectly. In fact, it ended in this legendary ambush, where his commander, a guy named Roland, was killed. But that defeat actually became one of the most famous stories of the Middle Ages. But all of those campaigns, they were nothing compared to the big one. His longest, most brutal, most exhausting war. A conflict that went on for, get this, 33 straight years. And according to Einhard, this war was just relentless. It was this bitter cycle. Charlemagne's army would win, the Saxons would surrender and promise to convert to Christianity. And then the second the army turned its back, they'd rebel again. It only finally ended when Charlemagne forcibly moved 10,000 Saxon families to other parts of his kingdom just to break their resistance once and for all. Okay, so after decades of constant war, the kingdom is massive. The fighting starts to wind down, and now Charlemagne has a totally new problem. How in the world do you actually govern this colossal new European empire? And this all leads to this incredible moment on Christmas Day in the year 800 in Rome. The Pope places a crown on Charlemagne's head and declares him emperor. But here's the wild part. At least according to Einhard, Charlemagne had no idea it was coming. Einhard claims he later said that if he'd known what the Pope was planning, he never would have set foot in the church that day. So as emperor, he kicks off this incredible cultural revival. He brings all the best scholars to his court, he pushes for legal reform, and he even tried to learn how to write himself. Einhard tells us he used to keep wax tablets under his pillow to practice his letters, but he just couldn't quite get the hang of it. He'd simply begun too late in life. But, for me, this is where Einhard's account really shines. It's not just about the big historical events. We get this incredible personal portrait of the man behind the crown, his habits, his quirks, the real him. Einhard literally paints a picture for us with his words. He tells us Charlemagne was tall and really strong, apparently exactly 7 times the length of his own feet, which is an amazing detail. He had a round head, big, piercing eyes, and beautiful white hair. You can just imagine this imposing figure walking into a room. But for this larger-than-life emperor, his daily habits were surprisingly down to earth. He wasn't into fancy foreign clothes. He stuck to the simple linen stuff his own Frankish people wore. He was an amazing swimmer who loved hanging out in hot springs. And during dinner, he didn't want music. He wanted someone to read old histories and epic poems aloud while he enjoyed his roast meat.
And this little detail right here, it's my absolute favorite. It just makes him so human. Here's a guy who could redraw the map of Europe, a man who conquered nations, but he absolutely despised his doctors because they told him to eat boiled meat instead of his beloved roast. He just wouldn't do it.
So, let's bring this all home. What does all of this add up to? The final, crucial point of Einhard's work isn't just about what Charlemagne did, it's about what was left behind. I mean, look at his resume. He doubled his kingdom size, he revived the title of Roman emperor, he kickstarted a cultural rebirth. These are huge, monumental things. But, and this is the big but, what if Einhard had never written it all down? All those details, his personality, his voice, they could have just vanished. And that's really the heart of it, isn't it? Einhard's book was a game changer, the very first medieval biography of a regular person, not a saint. And when you think about it, Charlemagne's massive empire, it fell apart pretty quickly after he died. But the story, the one his friend wrote down for us, that's still here. It really makes you wonder, doesn't it? What lasts longer, the empire or the story of the empire?